Hey everyone, it's Alex, and I am here with my video for the nominations of the 71st Tony Awards. I know it's been a couple of weeks since the Tony nominations came out, but due to being busy and uploading my other videos I had fallen behind on, I haven't had time to make and upload this video until now. As some of you may already know, the 71st Tony Awards are being held on Sunday, June 11th on CBS at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and will be hosted by Kevin Spacey. Now, the Tony Awards are a unique award show for me because they are the only award show in which I can't truly judge what's a good and bad nominee because I haven't seen any of these nominated productions. I don't live in New York City, so therefore I don't have time to travel down to see every show that's out there, and plus the shows are extremely expensive. But I do read a lot on theater news websites about the buzz surrounding shows, you know, what's getting good and bad critical and audience reviews, what's making the most money at the box office, what seems to be ticking off all the boxes for most Tony voters when they nominate and vote for these. You know, so I do my best to keep up with the news on all of this, and I can comment to a certain degree on what was expected and what was snubbed just based on the overall reaction of the whole theater media. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reveal all the nominations, and then I'm going to talk about all the buzz and what I've generally heard. So let's not waste any more time and dive right into the nominations for the 71st Tony Awards. Best Costume Design of a Play: David Zinn, A Doll's House Part 2. Tony Leslie James, Jitney. Jane Greenwood, The Little Foxes. Susan Hilferty, Present Laughter. Best Costume Design of a Musical: Linda Cho, Anastasia. Santo Loquasto, Hello, Dolly. Paloma Young, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Catherine Zuber, War Paint. Best Lighting Design of a Play: Jennifer Tipton, A Doll's House Part 2. Christopher Ackerland, Indecent. Jane Cox, Jitney. Donald Holder, Oslo. Best Lighting Design of a Musical: Howell Binkley, Come From Away. Jaffe Wiedemann, Dear Evan Hansen. Natasha Katz, Hello, Dolly. Bradley King, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Best Scenic Design of a Play: Douglas W. Schmidt, The Front Page. David Gallo, Jitney. Michael Yergin, Oslo. Nigel Hook, The Play That Goes Wrong. Best Scenic Design of a Musical: Rob Howell, Groundhog Day. Santo Loquasto, Hello, Dolly. Mimi Lien, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. David Korins, War Paint. Best Book of a Musical: Irene Sankoff and David Hine, Come From Away. Stephen Levinson, Dear Evan Hansen. Danny Rubin, Groundhog Day. Dave Malloy, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Best Choreography: Andy Blankenbuehler, Bandstand. Kelly Devine, Come From Away. Peter Darling and Ellen Kane, Groundhog Day. Dennis Jones, Holiday Inn. Sam Pinkelton, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Best Orchestrations: Bill Elliott and Greg Anthony Rassin, Bandstand. Alex Lacamoire, Dear Evan Hansen. Larry Hochman, Hello, Dolly. Dave Malloy, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Best Original Score, Music and/or Lyrics Written for the Theater: Come From Away. Music and lyrics by Irene Sankoff and David Hine. Dear Evan Hansen. Music and lyrics by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul. Groundhog Day. Music and lyrics by Tim Minchin. Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Music and lyrics by Dave Malloy. Best Featured Actor in a Play: Michael Aronov, Oslo. Danny DeVito, The Price. Nathan Lane, The Front Page. Richard Thomas, The Little Foxes. John Douglas Thompson, Jitney. Best Featured Actress in a Play, Joanna Day, Sweat, Jane Howdyshell, A Doll's House Part 2, Cynthia Nixon, The Little Foxes, Condola Rashad, A Doll's House Part 2, Michelle Wilson, Sweat. Best Featured Actor in a Musical, Gavin Creel, Hello, Dolly, Mike Feist, Dear Evan Hansen, Andrew Rannells, Falsettos, Lucas Steele, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, Brandon Uranowitz, Falsettos. Best Featured Actress in a Musical, Kate Baldwin, Hello, Dolly, Stephanie J. Block, Falsettos, Jen Colella, Come From Away, Rachel Bay Jones, Dear Evan Hansen, Mary Beth Peel, Anastasia. Best Actor in a Play, Denny Arndt, Heisenberg, Chris Cooper, A Doll's House Part 2, Corey Hawkins, 6 Degrees of Separation, Kevin Kline, Present Laughter, Jefferson Mays, Oslo. Best Actress in a Play, Kate Blanchett, The Present, Jennifer Ely, Oslo, Sally Field, The Glass Menagerie, Laura Linney, The Little Foxes, Laurie Metcalf, A Doll's House Part 2. Best Actor in a Musical, Christian Borle, Falsettos, Josh Groban, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, Andy Karl, Groundhog Day, David Hyde Pierce, Hello, Dolly, Ben Platt, Dear Evan Hansen. Best Actress in a Musical, Danae Benton, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, Christine Ebersol, Warpaint, Patti LuPone, Warpaint, Bette Midler, Hello, Dolly, Eva Noblezada, Miss Saigon. Best Director of a Play, Sam Gold, A Doll's House Part 2, Rebecca Teichman, Indecent, Ruben Santiago Hudson, Jitney, Daniel Sullivan, The Little Foxes, Bartlett Sher, Oslo. Best Director of a Musical, Christopher Ashley, Come From Away, Michael Greif, Dear Evan Hansen, Matthew Warchus, Groundhog Day, Jerry Zaks, Hello, Dolly, Rachel Chavkin, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Best Revival of a Play, Jitney, The Little Foxes, Present Laughter, 6 Degrees of Separation. Best Revival of a Musical, Falsettos, Hello, Dolly, Miss Saigon. Best Play, A Doll's House Part 2 by Lucas Nath, Indecent by Paula Vogel, Oslo by J.T. Rogers, Sweat by Lynn Nottage. Best Musical, Come From Away, Dear Evan Hansen, Groundhog Day, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. And those are the nominations for the 71st Tony Awards. For the technical categories, they all seem pretty solid. I can't really say what was truly snubbed because, like I said before, I haven't seen any of these productions since I don't live in New York City. Sometimes some of them might be filmed for a broadcast on PBS or Netflix or other platforms like that, but that doesn't happen all that often, and so therefore there aren't that many full productions I'm able to see. And in fact, I only saw one Broadway show in my whole life when I went with my high school drama club in the 11th grade to see The Drowsy Chaperone. Fun experience. But with all these technical categories, since I haven't seen any of these shows, I'm not really going to say what I like and what I don't like because I'm not in the proper place to judge that. For Best Book of a Musical, this is pretty much the predicted list of nominees. And for those that are wondering, Book of a Musical, it is the script of the musical, but it's not just the script. It's basically the whole story structure of not only the dialogue, but the whole story in between the dialogue as well. Choreography seems like a solid list from all that I've heard, although usually the main frontrunner for Best Musical often gets nominated here, which is Dear Evan Hansen, and that didn't get nominated here. But then again, I guess there's not really a lot of dancing in that show. And then orchestrations and score. These are the contenders most people were predicting. For featured actor in a play, again, these were pretty much the contenders most people were predicting. I've heard of most of these actors. Danny DeVito is obviously the most famous person in this category, but this is the very first time he's done a Broadway play, and although I've heard mixed reviews about the price as a production, I know Danny DeVito has gotten universal raves for his performance. I heard Nathan Lane was fantastic in the front page, that he just steals the show when he comes on in the second act. And then Richard Thomas and John Douglas Thompson. I know those two men have a long history of doing Broadway productions, but surprisingly, I don't think either of them had been nominated for a Tony before until now. So good for them for finally getting the nomination. And Michael Aronov, never heard of him before, but I hear he's fantastic in Oslo. For Best Featured Actress, admittedly, I've never heard of Joanna Day or Michelle Wilson. I'm aware of Jane Houdyshell since she won the Tony last year in this same category for her performance in The Humans. I'm certainly aware of who Cynthia Nixon is, for her film and television work, but I know she has a long history in the theater as well. Condola Rashad I certainly have heard of for her past stage work, and also for the fact that she's the daughter of Felicia Rashad. And then Best Featured Actor in a Musical. I've heard of Gavin Creel, Andrew Rannells, and Brandon Uranowitz. Never heard of Lucas Steele. Never heard of Mike Feist either. For Best Featured Actress in a Musical, I've heard of Stephanie J. Block and Kate Baldwin, and of course Mary Beth Peil, because everybody remembers her as Grams from Dawson's Creek. Never heard of Jen Colella or Rachel Bay Jones. For Best Actor in a Play, got a lot of familiar names here. Chris Cooper, of course, veteran film actor, Oscar winner, and this is his very first Tony nomination, I believe. Same with Corey Hawkins. He was in Straight Outta Compton, and this is his first Tony nomination as well, and he's following in some pretty distinguished footsteps, because I know that his role in 6 Degrees of Separation was originally played by Courtney B. Vance in the original Broadway production from the early 90s, and then played by Will Smith in the 1993 film version. Kevin Kline, of course, big theater and film legend, won an Oscar. I know he's won 2 Tonys in the past, and I hear he's the frontrunner to win again this year, so that'll make him a 3-time Tony winner. And Jefferson Mays, I've heard about his Tony winning performance in I Am My Own Wife, but I was only in middle school when that play came out, so I wouldn't have been able to see it, and I hardly knew anything about Broadway back then. But I hear he's just fantastic in Oslo, and even though Jefferson Mays isn't predicted to win the Tony for his performance, Oslo is predicted to win the Tony for Best Play. And then Best Actress in a Play, this is probably the most Hollywood of the categories, filled with Hollywood stars, because you got 2 Oscar winners, Cate Blanchett and Sally Field. I believe this is the first Tony nomination for both of them. Both their plays received mixed reviews from critics, although the 2 of them got mostly universal raves for their performances. Laura Linney is a 3-time Oscar nominee and a 4-time Emmy winner, and I'm not sure how many Tony nominations she's had. I know she's had a few, but I don't think she's ever won yet, and she could very well win this year from all the buzz I've heard about her in The Little Foxes. And then, of course, Laurie Metcalf. I know in the past, every time Laurie Metcalf has gotten nominated for a Tony, she was the only nominee from those productions. Nobody else got nominated. But A Doll's House Part 2 has gotten 8 nominations in total, so she has everyone else to celebrate with, and I hear she is the front runner. Of course, everybody remembers Laurie Metcalf as Aunt Jackie from Roseanne, which is getting revived on ABC next year. Seems every TV show is getting revived since we also have a Will and Grace revival coming out this fall on NBC. I also heard from many that Allison Janney gave a fantastic performance in the revival of 6 Degrees of Separation, and many expected that she would be a shoo-in for a nomination, but she didn't get nominated, and she's been labeled as one of the biggest snubs of this year's Tony race. With Best Actor in a Play, I forgot to talk about that. A couple people that have been talked about in terms of being snubbed are Mark Ruffalo in The Price, although there wasn't a whole lot of faith in him getting a nomination because of the play's mixed reviews, but some people thought he might still have a chance. Then there was Gideon Glick from this play called Significant Other. While critically it was kind of all over the map, many people loved his performance and assumed he'd be a shoo-in for a nomination, and kind of an out there nominee because of how early in the season it premiered was Simon McBurney for his one-man play The Encounter, where he uses sound effects to tell the story of this photographer that got lost in the Amazon jungle. For Best Actor in a Musical, these were pretty much all the predicted nominees. I heard Christian Borle was really great in Falsettos. Josh Groban made his Broadway debut in Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. I hear he's actually really good in it. Andy Karl, of course, playing the role originally played by Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. David Hyde Pierce playing Horace Vandergelder in Hello, Dolly, opposite Bette Midler. And Ben Platt, some people might remember him as Benji from Pitch Perfect 1 and 2. I hear he's the front runner to win, and I hear his performance in Dear Evan Hansen is out of this world, a career-making performance. Have to see it to believe it. Those are all the things I've been hearing about it, and I wish I could see it for myself, and maybe I'll see it when it comes out on tour, but I've heard nothing but great things about it. And Best Actress in a Musical, these are pretty much the expected nominees. Denée Benton, newcomer for Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, and then 3 legends, Christine Ebersole, Patti LuPone, and Bette Midler. I hear Bette Midler is just fantastic in Hello, Dolly. It's as if that role was meant just for her. And then another newcomer, Eva Noblezada for Miss Saigon. She was considered a bit of a surprise. Some people thought she could get nominated, but I think people thought the 5th slot would go to either Christy Altomare for Anastasia, Laura Osnes for Bandstand, or Philippa Soo for Amelie. And then Best Director of a Play. These are the predicted nominees. Same with Best Direction of a Musical and Best Revival of a Play. Pretty much the expected nominees. Best Revival of a Musical, people expected Falsettos and Hello, Dolly, but they weren't sure if the 3rd slot would be either Miss Saigon or Sunset Boulevard. There weren't that many musical revivals this season, so as a result there's only 3 nominations. And Best Play and Best Musical, these are pretty much the expected nominees. So since I can't really talk too much about what I personally think, since I can't really give a full analysis of what's good and what's bad, I can only really talk about the major contenders, such as for Best Revival of a Play, you got a lot of classic playwrights being revived here. Jitney, which is an August Wilson play, which has never been on Broadway before. It's only been on off-Broadway. The Little Foxes, a Lillian Hellman play, which has been done on Broadway several times. But what's unique about this production is that the 2 lead roles, which are played by Laura Linney and Cynthia Nixon, they switch the roles every night. So it's not Laura Linney playing one role the entire run and Cynthia Nixon playing one role the entire one. Every night they play the other person's role to kind of shake things up. Present Laughter, it's a Noel Coward play, which has been done on Broadway several times. And then 6 Degrees of Separation by John Guare. That was done on Broadway in the 90s. And it was also made into a movie with Will Smith, Stockard Channing, and Stockard Channing was in the original Broadway production too, and Donald Sutherland. And The Little Foxes, of course, was originally made into a movie in the early 40s starring Bette Davis. And then for revival of a musical, Falsettos, that's about a man who leaves his wife for another man, and he and his lover have to deal with the lover getting sick with AIDS. And then Hello, Dolly, of course, is the classic musical with the music written by Jerry Herman, in which originally starred Carol Channing. Miss Saigon is a revival of the big Cameron Mackintosh produced musical from the early 90s, and this is the same guy who produced big bombastic musicals, particularly in the 80s, like Cats, Les Miserables, and The Phantom of the Opera. Part of the British invasion of musicals, as it was known in theater history. As for the new plays, for just Best Play, A Doll's House Part 2, it's kind of a sequel of sorts to the classic Henrik Ibsen play A Doll's House. Indecent is a play within a play. It's about a 1923 play called God of Vengeance, and it was the first play to ever feature two women kissing on stage. And because it featured two women kissing on stage, it was labeled as blasphemous and indecent, and there was a big effort to censor it and get it off Broadway. Oslo, which is the front runner, is about the diplomatic talks that led to the 1993 Oslo Peace Accords between Israel and Palestine. And Sweat, which won the Pulitzer Prize earlier this year, is about factory workers in Pennsylvania who have to deal with losing their jobs. And Lynn Nottage is only one of a few playwrights to have won the Pulitzer Prize twice. And Paula Vogel has won a Pulitzer Prize too, but interestingly, neither of these women have had a play on Broadway before. They've only been off Broadway. So they're finally making their Broadway debuts. And I believe this is Lucas Nath's Broadway debut as well. I'm not sure about J.T. Rogers, so someone will have to tell me about that. And then for Best Musical, Come From Away is the story of the planes that were diverted on 9/11 to Gander, Newfoundland, a very small town, and as a result of the planes being diverted there, the population of the town immediately doubled with all the travelers being stranded there, and it's about how that community helped these travelers and comforted them and gave them shelter and hope while they were waiting to return home. Dear Evan Hansen, which is the front runner for Best Musical, is about a teen who's very shy, and then when a classmate of his commits suicide, he lies to the kid's parents that he was the kid's friend, and then he gets caught in a social media lie. That's all I know because I've been anxious to avoid spoilers for the show because I don't like to go into these things by looking up the plot in advance. Groundhog Day, of course, is pretty much a repeat of the original Bill Murray film, and Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, that's based on a small section of Leo Tolstoy's novel War and Peace. There's no way they'd be able to condense the whole 1,000-page novel into a 2-hour musical, so they're only using like a 70-page portion, I hear, but it's very unique from what I've heard. They like transform the theater it's playing in into like a 19th century Russian nightclub, so like the actors are literally everywhere around the theater, not just on one stage in front of everybody. And some of the other contenders that are nominated here that weren't nominated in the top categories, there's War Paint, which is a musical about the rivalry between makeup titans Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden. Holiday Inn, which only got one nomination, that's basically a musical reworking of the 1940s film. All the songs are Irving Berlin songs. Bandstand, which has 2 nominations. It's a musical about soldiers and war widows who form a swing band after World War II, and apparently it received an official seal of approval from a veterans organization for its portrayal of post-war struggles. The Price, which is nominated for Danny DeVito's performance. That's a revival of a 1960s Arthur Miller play. Admittedly, it was an Arthur Miller play I've never heard of until they announced it. You know, with my theater knowledge, I'm only really familiar with Arthur Miller's classic works like The Crucible, All My Sons, Death of a Salesman, A View from the Bridge. The Front Page, it's a classic 1920s newspaper comedy. Heisenberg, which got nominated for its lead actor, Denny Arndt. I know Denny Arndt's co-star, Mary Louise Parker, got a lot of praise for her performance, and many people feel she should have been nominated too, but the play closed all the way back in December, and when you have a play close that far back, there's a very slim chance that Tony voters will remember it. And then finally there's Anastasia, which is based on the 1997 animated film, and the same songwriters from that movie, Stephen Flaherty and Lynn Ahrens, who've done a lot of classic Broadway works like Once on This Island, Ragtime, and Seussical. They've kept their songs from the movie as well as written a whole batch of new songs, and there's some new plot elements here that weren't in the movie. And of course, Anastasia, like the movie, it's a fictionalized story of Anastasia Romanov, who was a Russian princess, or Tsarina, and she was the daughter of Russia's last Tsar, Nicholas II, and it's a fictional story of how she escaped the tragedy that befell her family and fled to Paris, when in reality she was tragically murdered with her parents and her siblings. There's kind of been a mixed reception of the show. Critics have been kind of iffy to it, but a lot of fans, particularly those who grew up with the film, are really loving it. And as a result, it's been doing really well at the box office, and there's even like a tour planned. People weren't sure how well it was going to do based on the mixed critical response, and obviously it's only gotten a nomination for Mary Beth Peil, who plays the role Angela Lansbury voiced in the film, as well as costume design. That looks like that's all the productions that are nominated. There's a ton of other productions that weren't nominated, but I'm not really going to go into too much detail about them because I've never seen them and I don't really know much about them, and I can't really talk about whether or not they deserve to be nominated, because at the end of the day, that kind of thing is all subjective. I can do that a lot with movies and TV because I see more of those, because you can watch those on your TV or in the movie theater, but I can't really do that too much with Broadway shows since I don't really see too many of them because I don't live in New York City. But I still like to watch the Tonys just like every other major award show, and I'm definitely going to watch again this year. But for those of you who have seen a lot of Broadway shows, or who are even more, or who are the biggest theater experts out there, please comment below and let me know what you think of this year's Tony nominations. And please subscribe to my channel if you have not yet already done so. And please stay tuned in the future for my Tony Awards review when the ceremony happens, as well as other award show videos I make in the near future. Thanks, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.